So I just want to first report that the opening of school has gone very well, I think. It's been very smooth. Talking to the students, they seem happy with the extra sleep. I think that's working out a bit for them. It's working out well for the teachers as well. The adults on the stage just have to get used to teaching all day and doing nighttime presentations, but we'll get that back. We'll get used to that again.
In person, too.
So how many people in the room, is this your first child going through this process? So a majority, right? Excellent. Well, you're in the right place. This is, without a doubt, having worked with students, the counselors in the room, myself, for a number of years, it's an anxious process. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made. What I can tell you is that you're in really good hands with our counseling department, our counselors, Ms. Slate. This year is my first year as a principal, but as for the last 10 years, I've been the assistant principal here, and one of the responsibilities that I had was to oversee the school counseling department over the last 10 years. And during that time, I've learned a lot of things about the school counseling department in high school. First is that it is not an easy job. The counselors, especially over the last few years, have to manage a lot: academic support, social emotional support, and post-secondary support. But what I've learned really quickly is how devoted and knowledgeable they are. And it amazes me when I see them guide students through this post-secondary process that the students that each counselor works with, they're really benefiting from the collective knowledge of all of them, because they're an incredibly collaborative team who share all the time and really have a lot to bring to the table as they've navigated hundreds or thousands of students, and for some of them, through this process. So you're going to see tonight a presentation that was put together primarily from the two counselors that are up here tonight, Mrs. Slate, our college and career counselor, and Mrs. Coulbert, who's been one of our lead counselors here at the high school for a number of years. And this presentation has been built up over the years along with the majority of our program. So a lot of information you're going to get tonight, you're like, oh, this is a lot. How am I going to remember all this? You don't have to remember all of it. So everything that's on these slides, first we're going to share the slide presentation with you. The presentation's also being recorded, so we'll share that out once it's ready. You, I'm sure, have received a number of school messengers that came from the College and Career Office or Ms. Slate, maybe one recently that says how to prepare for your senior conference. The students have gotten this in Schoology as well. There's some short tutorials in there that cover majority of what you're going to see here as well. And the goal for this is really to just start having a conversation about some of these components of the process so you can hear it and maybe have some questions, some follow-up questions regarding this. You'll watch some of those videos and peruse our college career site that has a lot of this information. And then you'll be able to take that information to your senior conference. And so the senior conferences, you should be in the process of scheduling them now. And during that senior conference, they can discuss everything that's in this presentation. But if you watch some of those videos and have a good handle on some of those things already, then they can just answer questions on those items and then spend a majority of the conference talking about more specific things related to your child, like finalizing their list and very specific things to them, instead of some of the protocol steps in this process, which will be covered in this presentation in there. So that's the goal for this tonight. I think that you'll find it to be very rich in information and hopefully helpful. So I'll turn it over to the counselors in a moment. Once they go through their individual slides, we'll open up for some general questions at the end. I would ask that the questions are more general. If there are questions specific to your child and your child's situation, it's probably better left for the actual senior conference or with your counselor, but we'll definitely take some questions. So welcome. I hope you find this helpful, and I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's great to see everybody out in person. It's been, I think, since 2019 that Mrs. Slate and I have been able to do this presentation live. So welcome this evening to our presentation. So to give you an idea of the objectives that will be covered in the senior conference, it will be an overview of the application process itself, the common application procedures, Naviance student procedures, what they're responsible for, what we're responsible for, and overall how to prepare for the senior conference. When you receive an email from your counselor in advance of your senior conference date, There will be a lot of information in there. It won't just be a confirmation of the date and time, but it will also include other very important information, much of which Mrs. Slate has already sent out to our senior class, and gives them easier, quick access right there in the email to click on the links with the instructions for all the things that they need to complete. Okay, so the senior conference will be a meeting in which you partake with your student and your counselor of record. You'll be able to come in person or Google Meet or combination thereof as it suits your schedule. You will sign up in Genesis in the parent portal. We have sent out school messengers regarding that, and the counselors have also posted messages to their particular senior caseloads in Schoology. So those two communications outline the procedure for doing so. One thing that I do definitely want to emphasize is that you really should touch base with your student or have your student with you when you are scheduling the appointment time to make sure that it's during a free period, such as a lunch or the study hall. We understand that sometimes there are circumstances that can't be avoided. We respect and understand that there are work schedules that need to be, worked around. In the event that that occurs, it is really, really important that your student email the teacher in advance of the class that they would be missing as a courtesy. So that's really important. All right, so I want to also, drive the point home that there is no right or wrong in terms of where you are in the process when you come to our table for the senior conference. This is extremely individualized, unique to your student and their timeline, their goals for the future, and what their deadlines may be for their particular schools that they are applying for. So one thing that is really the goal is to meet the earliest deadline that you have on your list. So that's the timeline that you're working on. Otherwise, the individual student can tailor the management of their application process to what suits them. Some students will, get a whole bunch of the Common App or the application platform that they're using out in front of them. Others will chunk it out into segments, which is what we recommend. Definitely don't leave it all till the end because it's very overwhelming. We hope that you have come to the conference with the FERPA and the consent to release information signed. That's in two places. The student completes that on the Common App side of things, as well as in the Chatham High School records and release form, which information has gone out about that. You can find that on Mrs. Slate's College and Career site under the senior forms and resources. You'll see the CHS records release form there, and that should be completed in advance of the meeting also.
And Ms. Schoolberry, I just want to add, folks, just so you're aware, the items in this list we will be going through as well through this presentation too. So the records release form, you'll see kind of that, just so you know, it's a perfect overview just to get the idea, but if you're taking furious notes, we will also have some designated time for those as well.
Okay, thank you. And then you should have a list of schools in your colleges I'm applying to list. It doesn't mean it has to be the final list, but definitely the list of schools that at this point in time you are fairly, if not very strongly confident that you're going to move forward with an application, and that all those schools are in that colleges I'm applying to list, and that you've updated it to indicate how you're applying and the application plan type that you're utilizing, whether that's early action, early decision, or regular decision. We also hope that all of our students have secured at least 2 teacher recommendations. This was a major point that was discussed in the junior conference, and it was expected that students would have secured at least the request for the teacher recommendation before the end of the school year. At this point, it's the time to follow up with those teachers who have secured recommendations for, so that you are prepared to move forward with officially requesting them on the Naviance side. And you are also aware of your test requirements. There are so many schools, more than ever before, that are now test optional. You can cross-reference that list on fairtest.org, which Mrs. Slate will speak to in another slide. But more importantly, if you are dealing with some schools that require test scores, you want to be aware of what they require and the deadlines for those.
Awesome, thank you. So having that kind of precursor of what to expect in your senior conference, we think is just a helpful thing to share with you all so you know what to expect. I had a student come in to my office today and be like, why do I have to do this senior conference? And as soon as she understood it, she was like, oh, that sounds good. And we're like, yeah, I think we know what we're doing. So we want to now dive into the part of the application or the parts of the application that make your entire kind of process. So we like to look at this through a graphic that digests everything all together. So this is what we call the anatomy of an application package. And I'm going to start with our school profile and secondary school report, the SSR, and then I'm going to go counterclockwise through this. Just briefly overview what all of these items and materials are. So if you hear someone say, oh, did your school report go? You're like, you know what you're talking about, right? Or you've heard it before at the very least. Some of these pieces we'll dive in a little more deeply, like Mrs. Colbert said about testing and those types of items. But so first, school profile and secondary school report, those are items, students love this part, that the school is responsible for doing and sending. So this is the part of the application where we provide colleges context of what Chatham High School is like, the courses in which students have available to them, what the community is like, all those different types of things, because admission counselors want to know and they want to review your student or yourself within the context of the school that you're attending. So a student from Mississippi has very different state standards, right, than a student from New Jersey. And so having that school profile and that secondary school report is usually one of the first items that a college admissions counselor is reading before they either review your application or start to review a whole bunch of applications from one school or maybe even one county. So that helps give that context because they want to know, did this student take advantage of opportunities available to them? Were they participating in clubs? All those kind of things. Our school profile is accessible for many years too and up to date for this year as well on our Chatham High School website as well, if you're ever curious to see kind of what that kind of looks like. So again, like I said, going counterclockwise, Mrs. Colbert mentioned letters of recommendation and teacher's recommendation. Going on the theme of things that students don't have to necessarily worry about, the counselor letter of recommendation is something that every counselor is going to write for a student, a senior in their caseload that's applying to college. So you do not have to worry about requesting that to be sent. It's going to go automatically. Generally, it goes with the school profile. They're kind of married together and it goes together. So your school counselors right now are working on those letters to send along with your applications. If you have not provided them information, we had a student brag sheet that we asked students to complete junior year, just to give them some more context. Our counselors, as Dr. Walker said, are super busy. They have pretty high caseloads and they serve 9 through 12. So any information you can provide that perhaps maybe you haven't had a chance to talk about in person through that brag sheet or as an additional email is always helpful to add to that letter of recommendation. So they can speak to who you are as a student, socio-emotionally, school activity-wise, all those kind of things, right? Who you are as that student, that school counseling side of things. The teacher letter of recommendation, as Mrs. Colbert mentioned, many of you likely have already asked teachers, this is an opening to kind of what is your student like or what is the student like in the academic sense. So we always stress to our teachers when they're writing teacher letter of recommendations for our students, which we are so grateful for them to do for us. They write a lot of them for our students. We're really grateful they do that. But we emphasize that they are speaking to the classroom specifically, any academic specific information. What we don't want, and our teachers are always really responsive to that, we don't want 2 letters that say the same thing, right, just with 2 different signatures at the end. So we really do emphasize that the teachers are writing about academic, maybe that student came for extra help, maybe that student did super well in that course. And sometimes maybe a student didn't do super well in that course, but perhaps they worked really hard, came to extra help, and improved their grade. So there's a lot of scenarios that we can take a look at, and that's why senior conferences, junior conferences, talking about your scenario with your counselor is important to say, hey, does this sound like this would be a good person to write a letter of recommendation for me? Your transcript is basically your academic story, telling it in a quantitative sense, right? So it's grades and numbers and all those fun things. So basically it's looking at your progress over the last 4 years, and that is going to be something that you request. We'll show you how to do that, or we'll talk about how to do that, I should say. And you'll have that sent to every school. Every school is going to want to see a transcript sent by us. And the reason why you have to request it from us is they want it officially sent by us so they don't think maybe you doctored it up and sent it over yourself kind of thing. We'll talk a little bit about self-reporting grades, which is a newer thing, kind of goes hand in hand with transcripts. Activities, overview, Audition and portfolio, those are extra things that might be added to your application depending on maybe a program you're applying for. The activities, I should say, those are general for our common application. They basically go over what are things students are doing to fill their time outside of school. It doesn't have to be president of 10 clubs, because that's just not realistic. It could be, I have an elderly grandparent at home and I watch that parent for them. I babysit, I have a part-time job at an ice cream store, right? Things that you're spending your time significantly, aside from like watching TV and like sleeping and things along those lines, right? So anything outside of school, those are important things to include on there. Test scores and essay, we have 2 separate slides on that. I think most people are pretty familiar with that. We'll go specifically more into test scores because there are some nuances to that. And those are 2 other elements to the anatomy. So I know that's a long slide. We've been on this slide for a little bit, but there are a lot of moving parts that go into the application. And essentially, we think it's pretty helpful just to kind of see them all at once and see what's really going to go into all the work you're doing over the next couple of weeks and months. So a lot of the students will ask, why do I need a Common App? What is Common App? Why do I need this? And oftentimes in working with students and teenagers, sometimes they're just told what to do and we're just like, just do it because we're telling you to do it. So I like to give them the why. The reason why we do is Naviance, our college and career tool, works with Common App. They speak to each other. We do a process called matching, which we'll show you, very simple, and allows us to send documents very seamlessly and effectively digitally to the Common App. Over 1,000 schools as of this year are on the Common App. It's been the kind of creme de la creme, and it's also, as the namesake says, it's common. So basically, students love it because you fill it out one time for some general information, like your boring demographic stuff, I tell students, and then it saves for all those other schools. So if you're applying to 6 or 8 schools, you don't have to do it 8 separate times, like when you maybe had to print it out and fill it out 8 separate times and mail it and all that kind of stuff, right? So the majority of your schools will all use this. We always, always, always recommend, for the sake of you, sake for our office, sake for the admissions counselors, to utilize Common App when you can. There is one little exception here. Some schools, I don't know what their beef is. They don't have a lot of friendly repertoire with Common App for some reason. They have their own institutional applications. Rutgers is our biggest one. They use their own application system, which so means you create a whole separate account for that system. The University of California system also does that. So sometimes you'll see state systems do their own system as well. Honestly, it gives them more control to handle application materials and things along those lines. So that's probably why they don't want like a middleman. They just want to do it themselves. So one of the most popular ones for sure is Rutgers. You create your own separate account. We get a lot of students every year that apply to Rutgers. It's an excellent school, so certainly understand why. But that's something to keep in mind. You're not at times kids tell me, Rutgers isn't a college, it's not in the Common App. No, it is. It just does its own kind of thing. So I had mentioned and briefly spoke about self-reporting grades. This is a trend that has been changing quite a bit over the past couple years. The reason behind it is colleges, rather than maybe waiting for the transcript to be sent, some colleges want to use the honor system, look at the grades that a student is self-entering. So I always tell the students, print out your transcript and enter your grades while looking at it using the honor system. It allows them to make decisions quicker. And they're, again, using the honor system, and then they're going to double check with the transcript. So we will still send that official transcript. It still goes through. But they want to make decisions quicker. We live in that kind of world now, right? Like I order Chipotle and it's ready in 10 minutes. Same thing, admission counselors want to deliver that to you and your students because that's what your students or yourself are used to right now. So the SSAR, the Self-Reported Student Academic Record, is the most popular system. It's yet again another account, so it's good to write down your accounts in a safe place. And that is where you're going to enter in your own grades. The schools here, Rutgers, Pittsburgh, Penn State, Virginia Tech, these are just examples of some popular schools that our students apply to that utilize this system. They basically tell us, if you didn't finish this SSAR, your application is not complete, according to us, okay? So usually what will happen is, let's say, so Virginia Tech is on the Common App. I submit the Common App and I go, yay, I did it. And then they're gonna go, hold on, one last thing. You're gonna get this like, congratulations, but it's going to remind you that you need to complete this SSAR as well. So there generally are processes in place to help remind you of that, but just be aware, you might apply to schools that don't do this at all. The Common App also has a similar thing called Courses and Grades section. There's a section on your courses and grades under the Common App that will tell you if some schools require it or if some schools don't use it. On our website, our College and Career website, we'll show you a little bit of that later on. There are websites, blog posts, things that list, literally if you click on a link that says, these are the schools that require the SSAR, right? So you could always just, when you finish your list, check that school, note if any kind of match, right? And just go through there. So just something to be aware of. Some of you might not even come across this at all.
Okay. So the next slide speaks to all the different application plan types. So one of the most common today is early action. When this came out several years ago, the beauty of it was that you could apply earlier and it didn't have a binding agreement like early decision, which is one school and one school only, because if you are accepted to that institution, you are withdrawing all your other applications and you are attending that school. So the spirit behind early decision is that is your number one choice. You would give your right arm to go, even if you didn't have the opportunity to see the outcomes of all the other institutions you're applying to. And there's just no question in your mind that you are finding that school to be the right fit for you. And you've had the conversation at home about the finances because you are bound to the decision if it is favorable. So early action, though, I do want to make a comment about that even though you can apply to multiple schools early action and you have the freedom to see the decisions from those schools and make a decision, the idea behind that is also sending the message that it is a strong interest school for you. So I will be honest in telling you, I've been here 21 years, and I pitch this all the time on our behalf that it doesn't necessarily mean you should apply to every school on your list early action, but nobody listens to us. And we understand that because, you want to be able to get your applications in earlier, have that decision-making on the application come back somewhere around the holiday months, and then being able to, kind of wrap up your college application process. But really, it's about fit. It's making sure that that school is a match for you and that you are applying in that fashion because of the level of interest that you have in the school. And then there's the traditional regular decision, which those deadlines are usually further out around January, late December, January, February, some even up to March with a traditional notification in around April 1st. And then there is the early decision, which I mentioned. Rolling admission, some schools have that. University of Pittsburgh is one of the examples I could throw out from the previous slide that is a rolling admission. That means that there isn't a specific set deadline identified, but what it means is that once all the components of the application are there and they can bring closure to it, they will move into a review and turn around a decision. As far as restrictive early action goes, there are very few schools that have restrictive early action. Make sure you're reading the fine print. An example of restrictive early action is if you are applying to that particular institution that has a restrictive early action policy, it may mean that you can apply to them early action, but you cannot apply to another school early decision. So that is really important to be aware of, and you will read that information on the admissions requirements section of the website of the school. Like I said, it's very few schools that have a restrictive early action policy. You can apply to other schools early action typically, but usually not early decision in that particular application type. Okay, so the FERPA release. The FERPA is the document that does two things. One, it gives us permission to send the records to the schools. So that is, a signature by which the student will do that on the Common App side, as well as on the CHS records release form that I mentioned earlier. It also encompasses the waiving your right to see your recommendations that are written about you. It is protocol in the eyes of the colleges to waive your right. There are many institutions now where if a student, makes the decision to not waive their right, which hardly ever happens here because of the reasons I'm about to say, they may not read your recommendations. And that is a critical component of the review, and you would not want that, to be compromised by not waiving your right. In waiving your right to see your recommendation, it says that you have full faith and confidence in the individuals you've selected to write for you. I can assure you here at Chatham High School that a teacher would decline a request to write a letter if they could not write about your student favorably. So we take that very seriously here. Okay, so this is the CHS records release slide. It refers to the form I was talking about before. If you go to the college and career site, and on the sidebar where the menu of items are, it will say senior resources, and you will see the CHS records release form link there, and it will bring you to a Google form that asks you to fill out those questions regarding your consent to release records and the waiving of your right to see your recommendations. That form is very, very important for our office, because once it is submitted, it gives us the green light to go authorize the button in Naviance that allows us to send the records out once things are requested.
And I'll follow up on that. This Friday, we'll be doing a wrap-up message kind of the week, specifically to senior families through School Messenger. It'll include the link directly to this Google form, so you don't have to look through the website, including the link to this recording, all those types of things. So on Friday, we'll be doing a summary that will also directly link to that.
Okay, so if you are applying early decision to an institution on your list, there are 2 early decision agreement forms that you need to complete. The first one is the Chatham High School early agreement form, which is the one on the left side of the page. This is an internal form for our office that doesn't get sent to the college. It is for our files only. Our secretaries assist us in the sending of the transcripts and managing some of the processes behind the scenes. And we all collectively as a department, individually as a counselor, need to know if a student is applying early decision because of its binding agreement. So that can either be signed ahead of time if you want to access it on the college and career site, again under the senior form resources, or you can sign it in the face of the senior conference with your counselor if you're ready to at that point in time, or you can sign it at a later time as long as it is before the deadline and you get it back to your counselor if you're still making some decisions about whether or not you want to apply early decision. On the Common App side, once you indicate in that particular school, you click the button that you're going to apply early decision, then the early decision agreement box will come up, and the student will be asked to click the button that they understand that it is a binding agreement, and that if the decision is favorable, they will be attending. And then in checking that box, another section will come up where it will ask the student to put in a parent email. Only one parent has to sign off on the early decision agreement form, but a parent must sign off on their side. We need the student and the parent to sign the agreement before we will see that on the Naviance side and be able to sign it as the counselor. So that section will ask the student to put in an email address for one of the parents. You will get a notification indicating that the agreement is available to you to sign, and then you can go ahead and complete that, and we'll see it on our end.
And a quick thing I'll add to, Mrs. Colbert emphasized this already, but I think the more emphasis, the better. Early decision is a big agreement and decision. If you are wavering, you're not totally sure, you want to have a conversation about that, talk with your counselor, talk with myself to kind of talk through, I'm not totally sure, because when I talk to students, this is the marriage, they are getting down on one knee and proposing to you, and you are saying yes until death do us part, right? So we want to make sure that you're thinking very intentionally about this, and that you're making a smart choice with that. So if you're just thinking, you're not totally sure, wavering on it, just talk with one of us. We can talk through that and help you with that.
And to piggyback on that, and you'll hear us say this in our individual conferences with you, that the ultimate decision of the selection of the college you choose to attend, it's a life experience. It is not just an academic one. It is a personal and a social one. A student needs to feel comfortable in all aspects of the college experience in order for them to do well academically. So I know that there's lots of thought about, will this, give me an advantage in the admissions process? How will it play out if, I am applying to a school early decision for those reasons? But really take a step back, take a pause, be very reflective about what you want in a school and if that school is the right one for you. Again, in all the years that I've been here, I've had it both ways. I've had students who have gotten into their first choice and then later have come back to me and said, you know what, it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, and I made a decision to transfer, and that's okay. I've also had students who did not get into their first choice institution and then came back to me later and said, you know what, I ended up going to choice 3 or 4. Things must happen for a reason. I'm where I'm meant to be, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Alrighty, so ACT and SAT. First thing that we will address is actually the bottom section here, so a note on test optional. This has been, most of you might be familiar with this, that test optional has been a trend, especially now due to COVID, from the past couple years with limited access to testing and all those kind of things. Folks in higher education, in secondary education, like ourselves, we're very happy that this is kind of something that has turned up. Because essentially it's saying, we're not going to necessarily look at how you did in one sitting of an SAT in a sweaty gym for 4 hours, right? If you feel like this test score is not the best representation of who you are as a student, it's important to consider this option to go test optional. Because essentially, if you're saying, okay, I'm gonna go test optional, the question we hear all the time is, okay, but if I go test optional and I don't submit, they are going to know that I am a horrible test taker. And that can be okay if that's the right school. Basically, if you're not submitting that test score, what you're telling them is say, hey, look at my transcript, look at my activities. Don't spend time on that, right? Some schools stay test optional because some students actually don't have great transcripts and maybe they don't do a lot of activities because they have a lot of other things going on at home, but they test really, really well. So that's why schools do keep both options open. So a lot of times that's a big question. Another piece about test optional, you may sit for an ACT or SAT. We generally recommend that you do at least for one. You may fall in love with a school that is gonna say you have to submit it, right? And we don't want you to run into a situation where you're gonna scramble to take a test to do that. You may figure out that, hey, of the 6 schools I'm applying to, 3 of them I'm going to submit my SAT score to because my SAT score looks really good when I compare that to the rest of the other people who have been admitted in the past couple years. And the other 3, you might say, I'm not going to, because I want them to focus on my transcripts. I want them to focus on my activities. I want them to focus on my essay and not be distracted by a number, those types of things. So there are many schools, over 1,800 are still test optional as of this fall. There were also very many schools, a huge list of schools that were test optional before it was cool. That's what I tell the students, before it was kind of a necessity. And those schools are the schools that are really committed to this idea that you're way more than a test score, right? So this is a shameless plug, but I used to work at Ithaca College in admissions, and we have been test optional for like 15 or 20 years. So again, we were doing it before it was cool because we were always saying we thought you were way more, we'd rather see your work 365 days a year than that one time at the SAT. So if you're someone who's considering this test optional approach, you're like, it's not me, right? That score is not me. I'm much better in this highlight. Look for those schools that have been doing this for a while, right? Last 10, 5 years, kind of thing like that. But let's say test scores are favorable to you and they are representing you in a really good light. That's excellent. We want you to submit those scores. So the ACT and the SAT, this is the responsibility of the student to do. Officially submitting your score is by officially logging into ACT or the College Board site, which is the SAT, and asking, paying, of course, to send your scores to a specific school. Some schools now, though, I have this difference here, this bullet point. Some schools, same with those grades, they want them officially. They want them to come right from College Board. Some schools are going to say, hey, we don't really think you need to pay to send it. Just enter your test score, and we'll take that as the honor system. If you then are admitted and you deposit at their school, then they're going to say you must spend, the $12 to send your test score to us because we need to make sure you weren't lying to us. But the schools that are doing this unofficial thing essentially are saying you don't need to spend all that money to send them officially. We're going to just trust you in this process. So similarly with the self-reporting schools for the grades, on our site there is a list of schools that currently allow unofficial scores to be reported. So my recommendation to students is, if you want to save some extra pocket cash for some Starbucks and all that good stuff, check your list of schools, check the unofficial school list, and see if any are there, and so you know you don't have to spend that $12 to send to them. But this is the biggest thing. Do know that it is your responsibility, if they're officially to be sent. We do not have access to sending them. We can view them if we need to, but we can't send them on your behalf. And you want to give a good amount of time for them to be sent. So if your deadline is November 1st, there's always a couple that do this. Don't request them on October 29th from the ACT. I know, crazy. 2 weeks in advance. Try to do that in advance, so that, because you don't know how many the ACT is processing, right? So you want to make sure that your score gets them officially by November 1st. So just keep that in mind when you're submitting as well.
And just to piggyback on that, I know a lot of times the question is, well, do I have to wait before I submit my application, before my teacher recommendations go, my transcript and so forth, before I can arrange for my test scores to be sent out if you're sending them? And the answer is no. All the parts of the application travel to the destination of the school independently. So the student is in control of their application. They can submit it anytime that it is ready, either in advance of or by the deadline. The teacher piece goes out after they have made that recommendation in Naviance, sometime shortly after that, up until or before the deadline, because the teachers need that time to finalize their letters, and likewise for the counselor. We will send our materials once the request has been made in that window of time between then and when the deadline is coming forth. But don't hold up any piece of the pie because you're waiting on someone else. All of the parts go independently, and once every single component of the application has been received and it's after the deadline, with the exception of rolling, as I explained before, things will go under review. Okay, we forget which person is doing the slide, so I'll run with it. Our college funding night will probably be coming up in a few weeks. I'm sure the school messenger will be going out about that for Save the Date. This is another component of the process that is important. The FAFSA, which is the form for federal aid, and then the CSS profile, which the majority of private institutions will use, will become available on October 1st, so you can begin filling them out after that. Important commercial message, those of you who have me as a counselor may hear me or have heard me say this already, that we emphasize that it is really important to fill out the form, even if you think you will not qualify for federal need-based money. By filling out these forms, it can lead you and your student to other sources of aid that you might qualify for, such as academic grants, which is still money you don't have to pay back. So there are a lot of benefits to filling out the forms and going through the pain of doing so. We know they're very, very time consuming. When we have our college funding night for parents, that will speak to this whole process in much more detail. On the College and Career site, on the menu of options, there is a college funding section, and there is a lot of information regarding financial aid, and a specific page that is devoted to the FAFSA and the CSS profile and how you walk yourself through getting that process started.
And that's a great point about the FAFSA. We know everyone has better things to do with their time, but for example, at Penn State, Stacy, the New Jersey rep, will tell me every year, if a student does not have FAFSA on file, we will not give them any scholarship. It's a state requirement. Pennsylvania makes them do it. So you don't really know. You could ask a school if that's something that they look for when they look at scholarship, but we wouldn't want that to be a reason you don't get scholarship somewhere. So something to keep in mind. CSS profile is specific to certain colleges. So while FAFSA works for everyone, CSS essentially is saying, there's some schools that are saying, we want more information, which is actually very good. It allows them to look at their institutional aid to see what money they can offer you. It's not federally related. It's not related to the federal government. It is looking at institutional. So for example, one of the more popular ones is NYU. They require the CSS profile, and again, it does get a bit more detailed, but it's trying to get more information to see if they can give you more aid, grants, or scholarships like you were mentioning. So there are New Jersey-specific opportunities as well. So the Educational Opportunity Fund and the Community College Opportunity Grant are great options for you to consider. They are, generally speaking, they're income-based, so take a look into those if that's something that you want to consider for scholarship and support for going to college. We also like to plug here the NJ Transfer platform, which is really nice, a 2+2 program. It's not an official thing, it's kind of what we just call it, but essentially a lot of students more and more are realizing that maybe they're not totally sure what they want to study. Perhaps their grades aren't exactly where they want them to be, and they have dreams of going to a school that doesn't, may not accept them with their grades. Starting out at community college, at County College of Morris, at Essex, at Union, could be a great opportunity to go for a year, for 2 years, and then work through a transfer process. New Jersey has an agreement with New Jersey schools that you will automatically, all your credits will transfer, everything like that. So something to consider if you're open to other conversations about different options available. Okay, so Naviance. Quick shortcut on our homepage. Under shortcut, so shortcut, under shortcut. Shortcuts, there's a Naviance student section there. That is the web link. Again, we'll have access to these slides, and it's pretty accessible. Logging into Naviance, you need to log in using Clever. That is synced with all of our Chatham-specific information and security settings. And you're going to use your username and whatever password you use to log in with your email and all those types of things. So do not do where the red X is. But you're all smart. You all knew that. Okay, so I think it's important to overview what is done in Naviance. Why are we using Naviance? What are the things this tool does compared to, let's say, the Common App? Those are kind of the two players, right? So in Naviance, you are doing some list building and searching. That is where, as Mrs. Colbert mentioned, your colleges I'm applying to list is. That's how we as counselors see. So as soon as a student comes into our office, I'm going to pull up your school list and see what's going on to get a good idea and have an open communication about that. This is where you also enter all your deadlines. So these need to be accurate. These are populating for teachers' letters of rec and transcript requests so that teachers and counselors know, okay, this has to be submitted by November 15th. So deadlines need to be appropriate. Method of applying also needs to be, I'll show you in a second that when I mention about that. Letters of recommendation and transcripts are both requested officially. So a lot of students will say, well, I already asked my teacher, I already requested it. You didn't officially request it, so you have to request it officially through Naviance. So this is kind of a high-level view of the colleges I'm applying to list and editing that list. So you're gonna have a school, there's gonna be a school name over here. You're gonna have your application type, so I'm deciding to apply regular decision to this school. I've chosen that deadline of January 15th, which is accurate, which is why there's a smiley face. You can track the status of your transcripts. As you can notice here, some say requested, some say sent. Office materials as well. Those are pretty similar. They go hand in hand. And you're going to want to identify your submission type. When you add a school, these are all going to be options for you. So a lot of our schools are Common App, so that's what we see with the Common App section here, right? If you're applying to a school and it has this, we don't want this. This means you're not applying to a Common App school, but you're also not using an institution's application. So see, Rutgers has this guy. If you have questions, just ask. It's a very simple edit with this edit button over here. But you're gonna wanna go through those. So those are just different examples of application deadlines and processes that we wanna see for a nice clean list. Okay, I mentioned briefly matching your account. When you're going to the colleges I'm applying to section, a lot of you might be playing around in the colleges I'm thinking about. Totally fine. It's not September yet, even though it's tomorrow, but that's totally fine. You're gonna get a pink banner that's asking you to match your accounts. This is allowing us to have Common App and Naviance talk to each other. When you click that match account button, it's going to pop up that blue screen you see here, where it's asking you to enter your Common App credentials. So if you don't already have a Common App, you will need to make it. And you're not entering your Chatham information, you're entering whatever you used for Common App. It's very simple. You hit submit, you hit connect, you get a green banner, everyone's happy.
If I could just say
Absolutely.
real quick about the matching. It is critical that you match your accounts before your senior conference. That will come in the confirmation email that's sent to you by your counselor. There will be strong reminders in there. We've been blasting out a lot of reminders about that. It makes the conference so much more productive if those accounts are matched, and some of the other steps that are included in that email, so we can focus the dialogue on the post-secondary plan specifically, talk about the schools themselves, answer any other questions that you have about the process, rather than take time in the meeting to go through procedures. Okay, so thank you in advance for that. Okay, so teacher recommendations. So as we mentioned before, in the spring, it was about securing the teacher recommendation request. At this point in time, it's now making sure that they are aware of their deadlines, so you can email your teacher if you would like and just give them a heads up that your earliest deadline is X for your particular school or schools that you may be applying to, particularly in the early fashion, so that they have that information. And then you're going to follow the procedures that are outlined on the College and Career site. You'll get this information in your conference. The procedure for how you go into Naviance and request your teacher to submit your letter. So that's a double process. So emailing them is always good, just to give them the information they need about how you're applying and getting the deadline, the earliest one you have, on their radar. But it is actually in Naviance that they will go and upload their letter and submit it. And when you go in there, you will see your list of schools. I believe this will be activated tomorrow. And when you're on that section in Naviance, your schools will be listed. It will indicate specifically how many teacher recommendations are required and how many are allowed. The key column you want to look at are how many are allowed, because even if a school requires one, they may allow more than one or two or so forth. And most students have asked at least a minimum of 2 teacher recommendations, because there are a lot of schools that will allow 2, and then both of those recommendations can go. But you want to make a very, be very careful about reading that information, so that if there happens to be a school that requires 1 and only allows 1 teacher recommendation, that you're then thinking about the teachers you've asked and which one of those teacher recommendations you want to go to that school and specifically request it. It's very, very important that you give our teachers notice. They do have all the way up until the deadline to submit their letter of recommendation. But the more advance notice they have through that email specifically, and then using that kind of chart with the recommended timeline, even for the transcript, to make your request, then that gives them the cushion of time that they need to complete their letter and get it uploaded on time.
And to the point you brought up earlier about waiting, if you are not totally confident about your list just yet, again, totally fine. We're still early. There's people here to support you with that. But you do know you want to apply, like I said, to Pittsburgh. And you have that in there. You can request your teacher to send it to Pittsburgh. You don't have to wait to have everything perfect and all of your schools in there. Your teachers will get an email that says, blah, 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 invited or you to submit a recommendation. But don't feel like you have to wait. I think that was a great point you brought up earlier. So on that same point with the suggested deadlines that Mrs. Coulbert was talking about, this is something we put out every year just as a nice kind suggestion to keep in mind school business days, right? In advance, 15 school days from your earliest deadline, to give the folks in the counseling office and your teachers enough time to have that, all of your documents submitted by the school's deadline. So all of these here are the school deadlines, popular deadlines, wrong side. These are all the popular school deadlines, and here's what we suggest based on our school calendar. So it takes into consideration that we're not in school on Rosh Hashanah, right? So you have to factor those things in, especially this one is always a doozy, January 1st, right? Because we have Friday, December 2nd is the recommendation for a January 1st one, almost a full month, because we're off for a good amount of time, right? So it's just important to have that processed in there.
And remember, you don't have to have submitted your application yet to request, nor should you hold that, part of the process up because you're waiting on some other piece of the pie. Okay, so just as I was saying, submitting an application does not necessarily mean submitting everything. So the application itself is the sole control of the student on the Common App or whichever application plan or platform is being used for that particular school. They complete that independently and send it whenever they're ready. And then the test scores, if they're being sent, that will be done separately by going to collegeboard.org or actstudent.org. The teacher piece will come separately through Naviance when those pieces are complete. And then the counselor recommendation will go as a package deal with the transcript and the school profile and the secondary school report and the ED agreement if it's applicable for that particular student. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the student responsibilities, they're responsible for the completion and the submission, I can't talk today, application and fees, the sending of the test scores at the 2 sites that I mentioned, any supplemental materials that may be required of that particular institution. Some schools have supplementary requests, other schools do not. Some examples of that are like the supplemental essay in addition to the main essay as part of the Common App that would be part of the application. And then they are responsible for making the transcript request and requesting the teacher recommendation in Naviance, and then, of course, prompting you to complete the parent-guardian record release form. Okay, so the documents sent by the counselor will be the transcript, the counselor letter of recommendation, secondary school report, and school profile, which all goes together.
A quick note on something regarding our mid-semester. So some colleges will ask for mid-semester grades. And I even shouldn't say the word some. A very small amounts will ask. They want to know the current progress because they're comparing that to the other school calendars across the country, across the world. So what we do in response to that is we post a mid-year semester grade, midpoint semester 1 grade, which we have identified as November 1st this year. Essentially what happens is a special grade report, a capture of a student's current grades as of November 1st will be generated, and that will be sent to colleges if they require it. Generally what happens is a school will send you an email that says we'd like to see mid-semester grades. A lot of times that might happen with early decision schools and some specific programs. But again, it's super uncommon. We want you to be aware of this though. For some reason every year it causes some hesitation and concern. Most colleges won't even look at that because this really, on 11-2, your grade could change completely, right? Most colleges want that official semester 1 transcript. We will send those for sure. But some schools, they're just antsy. They want to get your grades a little bit before. So our response to that is by capturing these grades for that. Of course, if you have questions as we get closer, we will remind you of this piece. But we just want you to hear this first now so that when we're talking about November and October, it's not completely out of left field for you, right? So anything you would add to that, Mrs. Colbert?
Yes, like we said, you may get an email from the institution indicating that they want first quarter or mid-semester grades, not to be confused with the mid-year or semester grade report, because that's separate. The other way that you would possibly know that the school requires that is in your application checklist. After your application has been submitted, you'll have a portal where there'll be a checklist indicating what things have been received and what's still outstanding. And it will say first quarter or marking period grades. And that's what we're referring to in this particular instant with our snapshot grade report that we will generate around the midpoint of the semester. The other thing that's very important that I sometimes add is that we have to have evidence that the schools are requiring them. So you forward the counselor the email that you received, or you send a screenshot of the checklist, or the other place you might find it if you want to be proactive and review the admission requirements on the school website and send a screenshot of that. Because we only send to schools that require it, and so we have to have the evidence that it is a requirement for them. We get asked this all the time by students, if one of my early schools does not require the quarterly grades, but they're very pleased with their progress for the midpoint of the semester, and they're wondering if they can take the initiative to send their snapshot grade report to the institution, and the answer is yes, you can do that. You will have access to the snapshot grades in the portal. You can download it as a PDF and then send it as an attachment to the admissions email of the institution. The key thing with doing this, though, if you choose to follow through on that, is at the end of the email, put a statement that says, if you need verification of these grades, please contact my school counselor, put their name and their email address. So that can be followed up upon, because sometimes the institutions will not enter the grade report into their file unless we certify that those grades are accurate. So that's one other option that you have.
Yeah, that's good information to know. Keep that in your back pocket, because we still got a couple months before we even have to cross that bridge. So I know there's a lot of information coming at you tonight. All right, so speaking of a lot of information, there is a ton on our college and career website that we've worked through the past couple years in response specifically to COVID and not being able to be in person. So you're going to see different headers. Where's my clicker? Here we go. You're going to see different headers of different sections that might be of interest to you, especially our seniors. These are on our actual website. I can't show you the full website because we're not on a webinar here. The site link is here. It's also linked to our counseling website. And you can simply just, as Google is everyone's best friend, just Google College and Career Counseling, Chatham High School. That will bring it right back up. It's a Google site. Important documents like the college application steps, which is a step-by-step form that takes you through the process. I tell students, I know people don't print, but print it out and literally just cross off each box as you finish them. Upcoming college and career events, pages like about self-reporting grades, and slides to the procedure and presentations we've been doing with students. This recording and presentation and stuff as well would be all accessible on there. So in review, like we said, a lot of information to discuss. We do want to emphasize in the department that despite this sometimes feeling perhaps overwhelming, it is a very exciting time. There's a lot of opportunity, especially for you students in front of you, and we want you to know, as Dr. Walker said, that there's a lot of support here at the school to help you with that and to get you on the right track and find the right fit for you. We talk a lot tonight because it is the most comprehensive procedure for post-secondary plans after Chatham that we have this whole night for college application processes. If you're considering another option after your time at Chatham, we'd be happy to chat with you, your counselor, things along those lines to talk through that. Because again, this is just really, really comprehensive, so we want to make sure we get that mass message out. But we're happy to chat with you about kind of whatever process that you're looking for as you're moving forward after your time here at Chatham. So in review, here are a couple items for you to keep in mind: preparing for your senior conference, signing up and attending college rep visits. An email is going to be going out shortly that we have college reps coming to visit Chatham starting next week, which is really exciting. Right now we have 117 reps already signed up, raring to go to come visit. So students will be able to start signing up for those post-Labor Day weekend. So those will start, as you can see on our calendar here. Our college funding night is Wednesday, September 27th at 6:30, right here as well. So that will be a great overview of the college funding, not just about financial aid, but grants, scholarships, things along those lines as well. And I try to offer lunch drop-in hours Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to our seniors. And just as Dr. Walker said, us being able to work in tandem is really a great opportunity for students to kind of take advantage of those things that are there. And take a deep breath. You checked off one really good bucket list thing, right? To start with this process, that you're here, you're getting information, you're seeing our faces, and you're learning all of those types of things. So, in the interest of time, we certainly recognize if you have other things that you need to do, you certainly don't feel obliged to stay or obligated to stay. You certainly can see yourself out, but I think we can take a couple questions. We could I'd be happy to reiterate them, so we have to use our big theater voices to ask them, but I'd be happy to reiterate them, and then Ms. Coulbert and I can answer them. Anyone have any burning questions? Yes?
I'm confused about the letters of recommendation. In one section, you're saying that the student has to sign off that they're private, but then it's saying you're going to show up in Navient. So I'm just...
That's a good question. So the question was that with the FERPA, you're waiving your right to review your letter of recommendation, but with Naviance, we're uploading letters of recommendation. And so the question was, how does a student see that or not see that? That is an administrative side that students don't have access to. Yep, good question. So there's a lot of stuff they can't see. Sorry, students, so you can't see that we all can see. Yes. Great question. So the question was, Mrs. Colbert, I'll pass it off to you. Do you request the letters of recommendation and transcripts both at the same time or individually for the schools?
Well, first of all, let me clarify. Do you mean on the same time that you request the transcript, should you be requesting the teacher recommendations on the same day? Okay. So in terms of the transcript request and or the teacher recommendations, they kind of, go hand in hand. But we'll start with the transcript request. So it depends on your deadlines, and it may be different for each individual student. If you're applying to 6 schools, and 4 out of those 6 you're applying to them early, in the early time frame, and you are absolutely certain that those are the schools you're going to move forward with an application with, you could request those. And if you know that you are going to, potentially accept an offer of admission from one of those early schools, and may not necessarily need to submit the regular decision application for the 2 other schools on your list, you could hold off on that because those deadlines are later. Or there are some students who would prefer to just request all of the transcripts regardless of the deadline, and that is absolutely okay too, because not that this is right or wrong, but if you are holding off on some of those regular decision applications and only submitting the request for the earlier ones, you do have to remember to go back in as the deadline approaches at another time to make sure that those transcripts are released for those schools later on in meeting the deadline. Now, having said that, sometimes in the course of the time that you're moving through the college application process, you might add a school or 2 to your list that, something emerges as you're thinking about more seriously later on and you decide to add an application, then of course that would be another time that you would submit that separately from the main group. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, essentially you can mass request all of them or just do them individually at once. Whatever procedure works best for you, for sure. Yes. A student question, yay! Sorry, I'm embarrassing you. So if your application, correct me if I'm not saying that right, if your application is a rolling school and you've submitted a request for a transcript, how long would that take for that transcript to be sent to the school? Oh, if it's ED. Okay. So that's why the senior conferences are always great to have, because you can communicate those types of things, right? That this is a priority school to me. If that's something you can prioritize in the grand scheme of everything, that's definitely a conversation that can be helpful for that. So it's a human process, so there isn't necessarily a time frame and how quickly a transcript will be sent or when it will or will not be sent. Essentially, we always say it will be in for sure by that application deadline, because a lot of colleges are not looking at your application until they're done traveling, until they're done recruiting, until they're done with all those types of things. So there is no general response really in terms of, because it's a human process. So talk with your counselor about that and say, hey, this is something I really want to maybe look to prioritize in the grand scheme of everything else, okay?
Yeah, we'll definitely do the best that we can to submit everything in a timely fashion, but you really need to be respectful of giving everybody the benefit of time. This isn't something that is a process that should be rushed. You definitely don't want a teacher or a counselor to rush writing the letter of recommendation when that is going to be a very strong component of the review. So just be respectful of the timeline. We do a very good job of turning things around and getting things submitted in a timely fashion.
Yes, sir. Yes, so the questions regard to early decision 1 and what is kind of a newer process, early decision 2. And so whether or not do you have to wait for the early decision 1 decision to be released until you can do an early decision 2? And yes. So as soon as an early decision 1 decision has been made, and if it's a denial or if it's a deferral, which means you're released from that binding commitment, that deferral does that, then you could enact your early decision 2, depending on if a school offers it. Not there, it depends. Some schools don't offer that. But yes, good question. Yes, back. Yes, absolutely. Any kind of information that really is setting you up for the procedural part, like Mrs. Coolbear mentioned, so that the conference can have productive conversations that aren't just about like, here's how you do this. For sure. Yes. Sure. So the question's in regard to the college essay portion, if there's any support that's given at the high school for that. So feel free to chime in if there's anything you think.
Question, Mrs.
Oh,
Slate.
okay, yeah. So for the essays, if there's any support given to students for essay writing at the high school. So essentially, working with your counselor is an option for essay writing. Working with someone like myself is for sure an option. Generally speaking, though, it's always best when a student comes and kind of sits, we work through it together, can brainstorm some things. I have those open lunch hours that we like to focus on doing that. And then we also have our teacher writing lab that is every lunch in the testing room. So students will be familiar with the testing location, the testing room. We have English teacher staff there during lunch to help with any kind of English assignment, of course, but more often than not, especially in the fall, our seniors are going there to work with the English teachers as well.
Yeah, it's also a good idea that once their student has a really decent draft of their essay formulated, to share it out to their counselor so that you can get some feedback from the counselor perspective as well.
Okay, and I think we'll take this final question. A lot of pressure on you, sorry.
You had recommended applying for financial aid even if you don't think you'll qualify. Does that impact an application if the school's not need blind? Sure.
Good question. So the question is, in the conversation of recommending applying for financial aid, even if you feel like you're not going to qualify for that, does that have any kind of impact negatively or positively on an application review if a school is what some people call need blind? And there's these terms that are called need blind and need aware. Some colleges are aware, they are looking at if you need financial aid when they're making a decision about you, and some schools are need blind, where they're not looking, they're not even considering financial conversations in admitting you to a school. So it does depend on the school. Generally speaking, though, schools don't use that financial piece to kind of negatively accept a student. The one time that colleges may not accept a student is if they feel like this is not a financial commitment they can make to the school. So if they say, this student cannot attend this school, there is no funds being available, it's going to be way too expensive for them, morally we're not going to offer them admission because it just isn't a financial feasible option for those. So that's usually what colleges are doing when they're doing the need blind versus need aware. It is going to depend on each school and going to depend on each family situation, so it's hard to kind of generally answer. I'm not sure if you have anything else in your experience to add to that.
Not on that front, because that's definitely your wheelhouse, but just what I reiterated before, to still fill out the forms so that you can be eligible for all sources of aid that may be available to you. But as far as need blind versus blind, it really depends on the institution.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again for coming tonight. It was great to be in person for an event finally after
Yes.
many years. As we emphasize, a lot of upcoming events. You will be getting a wrap-up email on Friday before our long weekend with links to all these things we discussed. And please schedule your senior conference. You can meet with these wonderful counselors, and we're happy to support you throughout this process. So try to have fun. Try to have fun. I know, I tell the students, they're like, it's not, but it really is. It's an exciting time. So again, thank you for your time.
Also, just one last reminder, the portal to schedule your senior conference is only going to be open through till Tuesday. So please, if you haven't scheduled already, to go into the portal and set your appointment. Thank you all for coming out. You've been a great audience, and you will make it through this process, I promise.